Welcome to the Autonomic Healing Podcast. I'm Tom Pells.
And I'm Ruth Lorensson. We'll be unpacking what it looks like to activate your brain to holistically manage stress and trauma that bring healing to the mind, body, and spirit.
Being free to live authentically as humans.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started.
Surviving or thriving?
That's the conversation.
That is the conversation, and the ABCs of it. And we're up to X. And
wow.
X is a difficult letter because X is, well, it's X. There's not a lot of words like with others. And I had thought that for X, that xenophilia would be a good word for thriving. Not very well known. Its cousin is very well known, xenophobia, but not xenophilia. So I thought X would be a good place to start.
Yeah, I think that's great. So let's just talk about what that means. It's funny, Tom, because I went into chat, my AI companion, and I was just like, give me some words X that are like beginning with X that are thrive, and there really aren't that many. But I love this word. We've talked about it a little bit before we started recording, but give us an oversight. What is xenophilia? I think we've all heard of xenophobia, but so we can talk about both of those words, but give us a little bit of the history of that, and then we're going to dive into like how this word really contributes to us thriving as human beings.
Yeah. Xenophobia, which is many people are very aware of, is the fear of strangers. Xenos is an ancient Greek word that means stranger. Somebody who's not from here. Somebody I don't know. Somebody who is unknown. And Xenos, if you think about the totality of human beings, we're all a bunch of strangers.
Yeah.
We may have a close community, family, or particularly in past generations, a small town or something. But increasingly, humanity has changed. And we're very much, if there has been a constant in human history, it's humans on the move. We just tend not to stay any place. And I'm a second generation American on my father's side. My grandparents came here around 1900 from the Netherlands. They were looking. It's not that it was a terrible place. They were looking for new opportunities. And so my father's mother and father came here from the Netherlands, 1900. And I'm just a second generation American. You are here as a first generation now American. And you have children who are first generation, who are now first generation, second generation. And but this is the history of humanity, not just in the United States or the UK, but worldwide.
Yeah.
Humans on the move. But humans on the move means change. For the people on the move and the people who moved into the history of this country, the United States, it's a nation of immigrants. And the Native Americans, they were the people who were here. This was their land. And waves after waves after waves of immigration have come through. And the irony to me is that those who were themselves the recipients of hospitality so that they could stay are now often the ones who don't want to practice hospitality to strangers.
Yeah.
Because humans on the move means change. And a very basic human's response to change is either stress and need, and how we respond to the stress and need of change. And humans on the move means change. the history of humanity and what's allowed humanity to survive and thrive has been the practice of welcoming strangers.
Yeah.
Without the welcoming of strangers, the United States would not exist. Fortunately for all of us, there was a welcoming of strangers eventually.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, you know, there's so many thoughts racing through my mind as you speak, because obviously it's a very relevant topic right now in the United States. There's some, you know, like the commentary on immigration that's been spinning around politically, and but then also it's whether or not we should be welcoming strangers, which obviously we believe that is part of thriving. That's the part of the set. We're all on the move as human beings. We're all ultimately strangers, and if we want to be welcomed, we should welcome. That's the point there. But then I think there's also, which we'll go into in a little bit, but I love this idea of, you know, it starts out with us extending hospitality, but there is you know, the love that can come from strangers too. And so I think when we get ourselves into a position, Tom, like we have, you know, in some of the political stances that have been circulating around more recently, where, you know, there's such a bad view on immigration, and I understand that there's all sorts of issues around it, so we don't want to get into it too much, but just we're looking at the core essence of this right now. Yes. But the point is, we've got to, some people in this country have got to such a point where it's like, it's all seen as negative. It's all seen as we're letting these people into our nation. There's a dehumanizing, I think, when we kind of put people into certain categories, and so it's so far away from, hang on a minute, if we welcome strangers, this could be a real beneficial thing. You know, it seems like so far away from that. And like I think you just said, this is out of a perceived threat. It's seeing something, instead of seeing something as potential and beneficial and part of who we are as humans and what we've all received ourselves, so why shouldn't we extend it? Instead of that space, people can end up seeing it as a threat, as a fear, as they're taking, you know. And so, like, how do we get there? Like, what is going on in that space?
I think that because this is about survive and thrive. And xenophilia was a word that was invented in the 1950s. In the early 1900s, around 1920, xenophobia came in to parlance. That's when that was created. And xenophobia was part of that whole movement of beginning to look at human beings psychologically and their fears. Phobos is fear. We sense or perceive a threat to well-being, and we have a fear reaction to it. Xenos is strangers. And
a
like
fear
I said,
of strangers, yeah.
Everybody's strangers. And we encounter strangers all the time. Or we don't. And we fear it. And then we become insular. And a fortress mentality. So xenophobia was looked at and identified as a basic human fear of strangers, of people who are different, who aren't like me. And if they're not like me, threat. Except all it means is they're not like me. And then the offshoot of that is a superiority. Because if they're not like me, then out of my inadequacy and insecurity, well, I'm superior. And so that must mean these strangers are, by definition, then inferior.
Mm-hmm.
And then the characterizations run wild. That's a survival mentality. There's a sense of stress and need, and we're just focused on surviving.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're focused on surviving, change is threat. The opposite version of that, and this is what was developed some years later in the 1950s, in reaction to the upheaval globally that happened post-World War II. And there was this pushback and this re-emphasis on, sure, there's conflict and people are different, but you can get past that. There can be peace. There can be living together in harmony.
Mm.
That's a thing. Yes, there was this global cataclysm of a world war and a second one, but we can get along because humans are always on the move. Humans have always been on the move. That's just a human thing. We're always seeking new.
Mm-hmm.
But when some people seeking new encounter people who are threatened by new, and then territories, that's where the fear comes in.
Yeah.
But the antidote to that, and this is why it's related to thriving, is because change is, and change can be an opportunity for something new and different. And new and different is change.
Mm-hmm.
But if nothing changes and everything stays the same, there's a word for that. Stagnation.
Mm.
There isn't life. There isn't growth. So, xenophilia is a modern term, but what's fascinating to me from an etymological perspective, the history of the concept, all the modern people did with xenophilia was just reverse a combination of two Greek words that existed for millennia. Because previously to modern times, as xenophilia, the philia, which is from the Greek concept of love for a neighbor, it's one of those types of love,
Mm-hmm.
Or a stranger, love for a stranger, affection for a stranger, a welcoming of strangers.
Mm-hmm.
Previously, the philia came first, and then it was the xenos.
Hmm.
So, phileoxenia was actually, if you have an affection for strangers, you practice something called hospitality. Why? Because here's a stranger.
Mm-hmm.
All religions have that.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting with hospitality because it's, you know, when you look at the roots of hospitality, and like you just said, you know,
Mm-hmm.
all religions have it.
Yes.
But there is something that, and now obviously there's the hospitality industry, which is a huge industry, but which is about money. You know,
Often,
for, you know,
yes.
often about, you know, hotels and the hospitality industry. But in some ways, I think we've lost the root of what hospitality is. Like, people don't really even understand it. You know, I think that, you know, even just in my own circles of friendships, I would imagine that some people could see it as like, oh, I'm going to be really hospitable. I'll have my friends over for dinner. And actually, we've
yes.
lost the fact that, hang on a minute, this is about a stranger. That's the root of hospitality.
Yes.
And obviously in the religions of this world, it came out of generosity, not the hospitality industry where, you know, a stranger could pay for a bed. It was rooted in generosity, being accessible as a human being, offering a stranger food on your table, possibly a roof for the night, or whatever expression of that it was. And so I think in our modern world, not just in America, I think around the world, we've lost a little bit of that root of understanding what hospitality is. And I think it's really important to know this is because it demands something different of us and it demands something different of us, and we receive something different when we do it.
Yes.
So it's both, it's not just a one-way street. It's what we grow when we receive a stranger in ways that we will not grow when we're just having friends over, for example.
Yes.
I remember when, even growing up, we often had some French students come and stay, and there was a level of hospitality, it was an arrangement. I know that people do that often here in the US as well as the UK. Exchange students, there's a little bit of a deal that happens, but ultimately you are giving an exchange student a room and some care during their stay in your country. And the benefit, I remember growing up, the benefit of just having that cultural experience, it was amazing. And that's the point. There's an exchange that's happening that's rich and diverse, and we grow in ways that we don't if we're shut off from it.
In other words, thriving. And if we are not enriched, it's surviving. And there is a survival mentality, and as I like to say, a thrival mentality. We choose, and we get to choose. Because we're all on the move. We're all on a journey through life. And we're constantly encountering strangers. And are ourselves strangers. That's, I think, the core of it. We don't like to think of ourselves as the strangers.
Yeah.
We don't. But we are.
But it's really important to, I don't know whether, I think that a lot of people have had these experiences, and I'll share one with you and our listeners. Because I think the more times we can remember the time where we were the stranger, right, and someone extended kindness to us, I think it cultivates something in us to go, oh, we should do that as well when the opportunity arises, when we encounter a stranger. And, we've talked a lot so far about immigration, but there's strangers in our midst. There's people who are
daily experience.
Yeah, it can be fellow Americans. It can be another person at the school gate. It can be someone that you just don't know, that's not necessarily in your circle, that you encounter. Maybe you only see them once ever in your lifetime, but there are gifts in those places to be given and received if we're aware of them.
Absolutely.
And so for me, Tom, I've told you this before, but I'll share it because I think the listeners hopefully will appreciate it and be able to find their own stories. But for me, I remember flying to the UK. It was like in the first few years of me moving here in America, and I was visiting my sister. My daughter Penny had just been born. She was 3 months old. And anyone who's flown with children, oh my gosh,
over the Atlantic.
Yeah, so it's like
far.
It was a 9-hour flight, and I had my daughter Penny, who was 3 months old, and then I had my 2.5-year-old son Titus with me, and I was flying solo, man, and it was just, and I'd done pretty well, it's so hard because you're just aware of everyone, and. Anyway, we flew, and I think it was through the night. The kids were exhausted, and we landed in Heathrow, and we were in this giant line to get through customs and all of that. And I was just exhausted. The kids were exhausted. I remember they just they looked terrible. They had runny noses, and I had one in one arm, another in scooped up in another arm, and I was trying to push this stroller along with our luggage piled up. It was just I don't know what I looked like. But anyway, there was this line, and I was like, my heart sank because I was just like, oh my gosh, how long am I going to have to... I didn't even know whether I've got strength to hold these children. And this line was so long. And then this guy came out of nowhere. He was in the line, I think, but he came out of nowhere and he just announced to everyone. He said, "Excuse me, everyone, this woman needs to get to the front of the line immediately." And he just took initiative and like escorted me to the front. Now I don't know how fair that was or how many people thought about it, but I clearly was in need at that point. And I think I just felt so seen and so grateful. And I've never seen that guy again. But it was, I mean, a little bit of an extreme example of someone seeing me, another human being, just having care for this other human being that they had no connection to. Mm-hmm. And to receive that was amazing. And so what that does for me is it makes me think, who can I see, like, who are, around me, wherever I'm at, whether I'm flying or whether I'm driving or whether I'm in the supermarket, or like, who is around me, and is there a gift to be given?
Yeah.
And so I think just remembering those, I bet you almost everyone will have an example of that.
Somebody
something.
Did a kindness.
Yes.
For a stranger. And we're all strangers. That's the reality. We're all strangers. And to receive love and to give love is about thriving. Because as you described that situation, it was a survival mentality, and I'm not sure I'm going to survive this. And I certainly am not thriving. And then this xenophile.
Yeah.
That individual was a xenophile. An affection, a welcoming for a stranger, and meeting that need. If we don't have that, let's face the truth that what we are saying is, I am in a survival mentality and I feel threatened and I feel inadequate and insecure, and I'm not loving strangers, and I'm not of a mind to practice hospitality. Hospitality involves strangers, not people known to you. This is a fundamental shift in the concept that I've observed of hospitality. Hospitality is having people over who you know and have a relationship with. That is not hospitality. That is koinonia, if we're going to get into the Greek. That's just having things in common. The point of hospitality is, we don't have things in common. We're strangers. That's hospitality. Any other definition of hospitality is not hospitality. That's just staying in the fam. Hospitality is about strangers. I was a stranger and you took me in. How human is that? Because we are all strangers. Most of the interactions, if you think about it, that people have throughout the day, for many, are with strangers.
Yeah.
They are. Humans on the move. So practice a love for strangers. Because as we do that with others, we're sensitive to receiving it. And that is when we as a species thrive. To not do that, we may even threaten our own survival.
Do you think that there's something, I think, just listening to you, Tom, I wonder whether there's something about it that reminds us, whether we are in a place of giving that or receiving that, there's something about that, whatever happens in that space, that reminds us of our humanity.
Yes.
More than our other associations. It kind of trumps our nationalities. It trumps all of the other boxes or labels that we can put on ourselves. It reminds us that we are human. And I think that there's something so life-giving in that I'm part of the human race. Like there's something that we need that knowledge again, because I think that gets lost a bit sometimes in all of the other things. And I'm not against, I think it's great to have pride about the country that you were brought up in and the family that you belong to and maybe a religion that you associate with or whatever it is. I think that all of those things, there can be goodness in those spaces. But to be reminded, for me, when I think that I get reminded of my human-to-human contact.
An essential thing that connects us and binds us, yes?
Yeah, there's something actually relieving about that for me, because I'm like, it feels the most authentic.
Yes.
Because I think it is the most authentic.
It is.
It's like, it's where we started. It's like, no one knew where they were going to get born. No one knew what family. We don't know how that goal,
or what change will happen.
Exactly. And so there's something about the reminder that I think that's what happens with strangers. Is the reminder that we're all the same. Essentially, we're all, like you said, we're all strangers moving around. We're all human beings with the same level of need and emotions and. Or not level necessarily. We don't have the same level, but we have those essential core needs as human beings. That's what I meant. But so I think when we are exposed to that, we get this kind of connection that we need as human beings to know who we are as human beings first, instead of all of the other stuff. And I think that's really healthy.
Yes, it is. And supports thriving.
Yes.
And the other is just a survival mentality.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I like to say, humans on the move, so love strangers.
Yeah.
Because that newness enriches. If there isn't new, there's just old.
Stagnation, yeah.
Stagnation. And then with stagnation, if there isn't growth, there will be death. It may be fast, it may be slow. In a time where there are increasing challenges to just surviving, if there's anything that would be beneficial, it's love of strangers. How often haven't we heard stories recently of some natural catastrophe? Some hurricane sweeps through, floods, all sorts of things, and strangers doing acts of kindness for strangers.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what this is about.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't have that, xenophilia, we will eventually degenerate into xenophobia. And then survival may not even be ensured. Xenophilia, that ensures thriving and is a thriving mentality. Xenophobia, fear of strangers, a sure sign of feeling inadequate and insecure and uncertain about surviving. We're in this together. Let's be together.
So good, Tom. So, listeners, go and get yourself some, go and give some stranger love somewhere.
Find yourself a stranger and love someone. That person.
I love that, Tom. So good, so important for generally, but I think especially for the times that we're living in, to love the strangers around us and kind of engage in that amazing exchange that can happen daily. It can happen throughout our lives, but being people who see strangers and Don't fear them, but instead offer them that hospitality. Such good stuff. Well, we'll get together again in our next podcast episode. Thank you, Tom.
Why?
That's the letter.
That's dad humor.
You've been listening to the Autonomic Healing Podcast.
Join us next time as we continue in our conversations with Tom. If you're interested in pursuing your own autonomic healing journey and want to find a practitioner, visit our website, innerworkings.org. See you at the next episode.